How's it going, everybody? It is time for Let's Talk Ball. I'm Thad Brown along with Carl Jones. We are back for another season. Yeah, we missed you last week. Look, it was a Sunday game into a road Thursday game. There's ain't many days between those games to make content for you all out there, but we'll talk about that Arizona game along with the Dolphins game. We do this every single week, breaking down the X's and the O's. And Carl, let me start with this. 2-0 for the Bills. I don't think being 2-0 is a shock. I think maybe the way it kind of happened, especially that Thursday game, is a shock. But what side of the ball are you more impressed with through two games with the Bills?
Defense, and it's not even close. I was kind of always of the belief that as long as 17, Josh Allen is your quarterback, things will figure itself out. Rarely do elite quarterbacks have a struggling unit throughout the entire year. I mean, you think back to Tom Brady's, your Peyton Manning's, your Drew Brees's, Ben Roethlisberger. You can go on and on about guys of that caliber. The offensive side of the ball tends to figure itself out. They'll figure it out the way. The Bills defense with all the changing parts, the injuries, that's the side of the ball where to this point, I'm impressed with what I've seen so far.
Yeah, let's talk about especially the part where the injuries have happened, which is the back end. More or less, it's really the second level. It's the nickel corner and Taron Johnson and both the linebackers. You know, you've got a great background playing corner at Syracuse with being able to look at coverages and what's going on. How are the Bills through two games, especially one against the Tua, Tyreek, Jalen Waddle experience, holding up on the back end with so many injuries and really so many new guys back there occupying starting spots?
Yeah, I do want to give credit to the players themselves. Cam Lewis, Jamarcus Ingram, who was sliding in at the dime cornerback, Balen Spector, who stepped in for Terrell Bernard on Thursday. Some of it has to do with the fact that the Bills are playing a ton of too high safety looks, which means two safeties are always back there and they're going to cap off the top of the defenses, which means some of those guys at the second level aren't asked to do as much in terms of roaming space, right? Like if you always know you have a safety over the top of you, you don't have as much ground to cover when you think about the second level players in that regard. But then also, I think they kind of play to their strengths to a certain extent where they're not putting Balen Spector and Cam Lewis in man coverage 50% of the time. They're asking them to just keep everything in front of them and rally to the tackling point. So I think those two players in particular, I know Balen Spector struggled a little bit, especially when he stepped right into the game when the Dolphins scored right away. But I think he played well after that. And some of the weaknesses of the Miami offensive attack, I think, played right into where the Bills wanted to play. I mean, the Bills didn't blitz at all when Tua Tagovailoa was out there. And I think they did that by design based off the fact that they knew that they can whoop them up front and everywhere else they would play sound coverage. So they've done their job, and the Bills haven't asked too much of them, and that's why they've been able to survive with those two guys in there.
And not only does that help out for the guys underneath, it helps out for the safeties who are new at their job. You make their job simple. You know, you just tell both of them, look, you're going to cap everything deep. You know, nothing gets past you. That's all you're doing. We're not worried about, too much buzzing. You don't got to blitz. You're not, run fitting off the edge. You're just back here. Make sure, you cap everything at the top. And I think that was, to me, the biggest thing, whether being watching the game live or on film, the Bills kept it simple and executed. We may describe what they're doing in the secondary. You're saying, okay, the guys underneath have help deep, the deep guys have help underneath. Yeah, it's one thing to say that, but it's easy to exploit that if they're not doing it exactly as you're supposed to. And I think, to me, the thing I was impressed with most with the back seven is that those guys did exactly what they were asked to do over and over. And it didn't matter who was in there, And I do want to talk about the linebackers for a minute here, because that's where the injuries have hurt the most, with both now Matt Milano and Terrell Bernard out. Balen Spector, I don't know if you noticed this. There were two plays where he ran with Tyreek Hill in pass defense. There was one where he ran the rail right down the middle of the field and hung with Hill mostly step for step. Now, look, I don't want to do that all the time, but the reason I bring that up is I was surprised at how much the upper end of what Spector and, to a lesser degree, Dorian Williams have been able to accomplish these last two games with the two main linebackers not in for the entirety of the time.
Yeah, and this is going to sound crazy coming from someone who likes the X's and O's, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I'm almost getting to a point. I'm not all the way there yet because I still love the scheme stuff on defense, but I'm almost getting to a point where attitude and like toughness is almost more important than anything else. When I watched that game back, some of that stuff like Daquan Jones said last year, it's about a man whooping another man. And I'm watching Cam Lewis I forget one of the Dolphins receivers, but he literally tried to crack block him. He said, "Excuse me, get off me. I'm gonna roll off of you and attack you with my butt." Like that's kind of the plays that they were making. Christian Benford's coming off the edge, setting the edge. Rasul Douglas did this as well, dating back to the Cardinals game as well. They're playing sound coverage, and that is fair. They're not the only team in the league that can do that. But what makes them different to this point is the fact that they're able to rally once the ball carriers get to the point of attack, the Bills are taking them down. The front four are doing that as well. I mean, the one play where Dorian Williams just met, I don't know if it was Achane in the hole for
It was the fullback, right, on the third and short, I think.
I mean, that just take me back to the first day of pads when we do Oklahoma drill. It's just you and me, and you're like, ooh, that's a sound I made when I saw it live. They play with a certain attitude and toughness that, quite frankly, I don't know if the Dolphins have at this point, and that's why it's been a lopsided matchup over the past few years.
I love that play because the Dolphins got the Bills on a third and short with the fullback early in the game, and Dorian Williams kind of overran the play. And I remember watching it the first time, knowing he stopped the second one, thinking, I bet you'll learn from that first one. And he did. I mean, he was right in the hole. Before we move up front, though, one more thing on the D-backs, and I want your take on this as someone, played the position. The thing that I was most impressed with, of all the stuff we talked about with the defensive backs, is how well they tackled against Miami. Because the Dolphins were running it on the Bills all night long. I mean, they had runs to the second and third level over and over and over, but not one of them went out the back door. That's because Douglas and Benford and the safeties, to me, tackled over and over and over. Am I giving that too much credit? I mean, tackling is the basic thing in football, but to me, I felt like that was a big key in not letting the Dolphins get any big explosive plays.
You're 100% with that one, because if you notice, anyone who watches the Dolphins, the core of their offense begins with their running game. They like to get off tackle, get those speedy guys, Achane and Mostert off tackle, and they dare your DBs to tackle in space. Well, the Bills have two of the better tackling corners in all of football, in my opinion, and they kind of shut that down. Now, what the Dolphins did in the second and third quarter to combat that was just run right at them, which isn't really the Dolphins' strength, but they did it anyways. And where are the Bills lacking or inexperienced to a certain extent is the spine of the defense with the linebackers and then the safeties as well. So I'll give all the guys on the perimeter credit. Damar Hamlin had Tyreek Hill one-on-one, and he said, no, we're going to funnel this right to the sideline. I'm not about to be stupid here. So I do want to give those guys credit, going up against guys who are Olympic-type athletes, freaks right there, and they did a good job of not freaking out and getting them down to space.
Now, you talked about issues up the spine of the defense, and one of those, surprisingly for me, has been Daquan Jones through 2 games. Not that he's been bad, but the Bills ran a lot of light boxes against the Dolphins against the run. And for that to work, you need Ed Oliver and Daquan occupying 2-3 guys at a time. And that didn't happen a lot in this game or against the Arizona game. Again, he's not been playing bad, but this is a guy that I think the Bills have relied upon and have seen play real well against the run. Now, moving it to the outside with the edges, I think both Greg Rousseau and Von Miller have had incredible starts through 2 games. Miller, look, he's not playing a ton of snaps, and I think that's probably what the Bills want him to do. The other funny thing, and let me know if you notice this at all, Von talked this week about how we're not going to get many opportunities to rush because Tua gets the ball out so fast. And there were more than a few rushes where it looked like Von got off the ball and was like, I just don't have a chance to get there, so I'm not going to bother. But when he needed to get there, he had, obviously got a sack and had a great spin move earlier. By the same degree, Ed Oliver, he only had 2 pressures in the game, but one was a sack on 4th down, another was a 3rd down pressure that forced Miami into an incompletion. So the thing that I've liked about the Bills so far with the front 4 is that not only have they been better than expected, but they've been good at the absolute right times.
Yes, I think that's the point that I wanted to touch on, especially with Von Miller in particular. When they brought him in 2 years ago or 3 years ago at this point now to be the closer, be that guy coming off of the ACL 2 seasons ago, I don't know if the expectations are that he'll be the Hall of Famer, quote unquote, that they brought in. But what they do expect for him to be, I guess, hoping at this point, can you be that guy who can, hey man, it's 3rd and 6. We really need to get off the field right now. Can you be that guy? 4th quarter against the Cardinals, he was able to make a play. When they got into the red zone, I believe the 3rd quarter against the Fins, he was able to make a play as well. If he can provide that, just provide a few timely pressures, and so that translates into December, into January, where, man, the defense didn't really play great all day, but they got off the field right when they needed to do so. Those are the pressures and the plays that add up and that you need, especially the type of guys they're going to go up against in the postseason. Because truthfully, I'm at the point now with the Bills where I hold them to a expectation where how does this translate versus the Bengals or the Chiefs or the Ravens? And that's no disrespect to the Jets or the Dolphins, but when you have the type of roster that they have and the quarterback that they have, I'm always thinking forward. And I know that's kind of disrespectful to the regular season, but that's just where my mindset is.
Yeah, the thing with Von Miller, you talk about him playing at a Hall of Fame level. He's got 2 sacks already. if he gets a sack, one sack every other game, so let's say one pressure every other game the rest of the year, it's a 10 sack season. That's you build Hall of Fame careers on 10 sack seasons. So it's not like he's got to be there. It's not like the best guys ever were there all the time. I don't think Von Miller is what he was 2, 3, 4 years ago, but the level he's been at so far, I've been very encouraged. One more thing on the defense for me. Game 1 against the Cardinals, Daquan, Ed Oliver, and I think it was Rousseau. Daquan, Ed Oliver, and Rousseau all played 75% of snaps, which is a ton for the Bills defense. Didn't have to against Miami because the game was out of hand. I'm curious to see if they continue with that going forward, because the second level guys, Dwayne Carter, Austin Johnson, they really haven't been super impressive. AJ Epinesa too. You don't want to have to rely on those guys with the way they want to operate their defense, but still early. Anything else on the defense from you, or are you ready to go offense?
No, we're ready to talk about some offense.
All right, now, before we started this, you had a good point, and I know I've been seeing this and I've been thinking it too. It's not so much a granular Bills versus Dolphins point, but it does obviously apply to the Bills based on what's going on league-wide this year.
Yeah, to this point, everyone's, there's not, the passing stats aren't there, especially with a quarterback like Josh Allen. If you're a Bills fan out there, you're like, man, he's only throwing for 130 yards, hasn't crossed 300 yet. What's going on? Joe Brady tripping, offense, these receivers, everybody eats. It's dumb and stupid, whatever the case may be. I do want to point out the fact that passing touchdowns through 2 weeks are significantly down dating back to 2019. There have been 69 passing touchdowns in week 1 and week 2. Last year, there were 86. 2 years ago, 105. The year before that, in 2021 and 2020, 110. And then 105 the year before that. I do want to just caution everyone and say, hey, this isn't a Josh Allen, Joe Brady problem. This is across the NFL and how defenses have now fought back. I know for a lot of people out there, you want to see touchdowns, fireworks. Oh, my gosh, touchdown celebration, whoop, whoop. Well, the defense has said, not so fast, my friend. We figured out some ways to combat that. And there are some – I'll give 2 reasons as to why that's the case. One, a lot more too high shell coverages, 2 deep safeties like we spoke about with the Bills. The Bills aren't the only team doing that. Everyone's doing that as well. Remember when Patrick Mahomes hit the scene in 2018? Wow, he's throwing deep all the time. Why are you not doing it no more? Well, I mean, they're not letting that happen. Mahomes, you're not getting that no more, my boy. And then also, I do think offenses are realizing you guys are getting so light out there on defense with your backers and nickelbacks. Why not just run at you and just be as efficient in that regard? So I think caution everyone. Nothing's wrong with Josh Allen or Brady. It just looks different now.
Yeah, and not only is it just the way defenses have responded, and now offenses are responding to the response, but because the thing to do offensively now is to run at light boxes, both in size of player and number of players. But when you're running all the time, it speeds the game up. I mean, last night there was a Monday night game. It was the Eagles-Falcons. Thing kicks off at 8:15. It was done by 11, 2:45. And this wasn't like an everybody runs 3 yards in a cloud of dirt 9-3 game. There was some throwing. There was some points. The first game of the year for the Bills, one of the things that stood out to me is they play the Cardinals. It was 17-10 at the half. Each team had 3 possessions. Games are going to just not have as many opportunities for passing yards, passing touchdowns, and points because of the way offenses have responded. But to your point, I think that is the way this league is going for at least now. And the Bills are in a good spot with it because they are not afraid to take advantage of the opportunities to run the ball. The one thing that I've been wanting to see, and we talked about this a little bit last year, when the Bills face all these light boxes in terms of number of defenders, that's great. That's how you get efficient. People talk about how great the Bills' run game was because of success rate and efficiency. Well, that's because there ain't nobody there to tackle him. It's James Cook goes 5 yards before anybody touches him. You get very efficient that way. But when it's only 5 and 7 every time, then teams are going to keep letting you do it because they're going to wait for you to mess up once, and now they got you. The thing that was different Thursday, James Cook ripped off a 50-yarder. That, to me, is the kind of thing that will start forcing teams to make the decision against the Bills. Do I keep going light boxes and risk giving up big play touchdowns on the ground, or do I have to fill bodies in the box and risk Josh Allen throwing it over my head?
We spoke about that exact skill set of James Cook's ad nauseum on this show right here, where James Cook can get you the yardage was blocked. If it's blocked for 6, he's going to get you 7. But that touchdown run where he zoomed past Jordan Poyer and the rest of the Dolphins defense, that's something that I don't know if we would have saw his rookie year or even last year, where he's creating a little bit on his own. And that's where if you're a defense, you're like, man, I know we giving up 6, but this boy taking like 17 now. And I think that's kind of the yin and yang that teams are going to have to play with some of these better quarterbacks across the league where, yeah, I'm all right with them giving up 7 yards because Josh Allen can throw a 70. Well, shoot, James Cook can also go 70 now. And I think the Eagles game was a great example of that, where they had no problem, the Falcons defense, letting Saquon Barkley do what he was doing because they weren't fearful that he was going to break off a 70-yard run because A.J. Brown wasn't there. But that's a whole different debate. My point is, though, if James Cook can take that step and be a guy who consistently, once or twice a game, rattle off more than what's blocked, man, if you're a DC, you're in the dilemma right there.
Especially when it's the big play, the 50-yarder. Even the occasional 12 or 15, I think coordinators will accept. But the touchdown, the game-changing play. I mean, that game went from still a contest to Buffalo in total control, just like that. James Cook, going 50 yards. Give me your take on Joe Brady. Through 2 games, I think I've liked most of what I've seen. I think end of the Arizona game, I thought he ran out of run play ideas. In a game where there are a lot of plays. But the 4th down call against the Dolphins was fantastic. I love the Dawson Knox throw week 1 against Arizona. I think there's been a whole lot more good than bad, and the everybody eats thing is everybody's eaten so far.
Yeah, I do want to give him credit for when something's not broke, he's not scared to go right back to it. I mean, that Cardinals game, I saw the same run play like 5 times, and I think 3 of them were on the same drive where they were going opposite of the tunnel. Where I'm like, listen, I mean, I'm not mad at you because you getting like 8 yards a pop at it. Sure, it was right in between O'Cyrus Torrence and Spencer Brown, and whatever they were doing on the defensive side of the ball, they couldn't stop it. So I love an OC who's not afraid to be boring and go back to what's working. I will say I'm intrigued to see what they'll look like when they go up against a defense who's not scared of them. And I'm not saying that they're not scared of Josh Allen, because every single DC, every week when they play the Bills, they have the red laser on 17 because he's that good of a player. But what I mean by that is the Dolphins and Cardinals play with too much passivity to me. And I think it's kind of hard to judge some of the other players and the OC. How do you punch back when someone is trying to punch you? Like, are you going to slip? Are you going to take the punch? Whatever the case may be. So I don't know if the Jags will be that. I don't know. I know the Ravens will, and I do know the Jets punch back in a different type of way. So what are you going to do when these teams are just allowing you to just sit back in too high coverage all day and just allow you to just matriculate the ball down the field? I think that's the next step that I want to see out of Joe Brady.
Yeah, I agree with that. And we talked about a little bit last year remember this time last year, Ken Dorsey's offense was the thing that was working for the Bills. Everybody loved it. And then we got to week 5 when teams get that full 4-game view of what's going on. They started taking it apart and the guy was fired 2 months later. I don't think that's going to happen to Joe Brady. The point being, though, whatever you have dreamed up in the offseason usually looks pretty good for the first month of the season. Then things get real, starting about week 5. To that point, the offensive line so far, I think, has been good for the most part. Connor McGovern, the new center, there's been a couple blitz busts, especially in that Arizona game. Didn't get tested a ton against Miami. Look, when you're up 3 touchdowns most of the second half, it's not hard to have the advantage of the offensive line. I've liked Alec Anderson as the 6th offensive lineman so far. And again, what the Bills like to do in the run game with pulling tackles, a lot of zone, a lot of kind of gap scheme stuff, they seem to have felt pretty comfortable doing so far. I'm not blown away by anyone, but there's a lot of good, not great so far with the offensive line, which I think the Bills will probably sign up for.
100%. They took care of a Cardinals defensive line that was severely outmatched. I mean, I know the games aren't played on paper, but I think that was the matchup that everyone was like, yeah, I think the Bills got an advantage right there. And they took care of that. And Jalen Phillips is still recovering from his Achilles surgery last year, but he had a sack in week 1 and he didn't really make much noise in week 2, if any at all. So I think that speaks to the solid play at bare minimum that the Bills offensive line is playing with right now.
Well, and Emmanuel Ogbah and who's the Calais Campbell both had sacks against Jacksonville week 1, and they were quiet. Again, look, the game script makes it easy for the Bills offensive line to succeed. I think, and really, if you want to take a step back with this team, when I start talking about good, not great, you wonder if there's a lot of that going around. Like, I think there's been a lot of players who've exceeded expectations early in the season through 2 weeks have been the guys who you're like, boy, I don't know if they can play. And they're like, wow, this guy's pretty solid. But and I'm going to get to this, I'm bringing this up right now because the guys I'm going to talk about are the ones that maybe you hope would be, I think they'll be okay, but I want to see if they're going to be great. To me, it's Dalton Kincaid, and to a little lesser extent, Keon Coleman. Kincaid, obviously got triple and quadruple and half the defense covered by Arizona. Miami, like you talked about, there weren't many opportunities. The thing I'm concerned with Kincaid so far is that he does not look like a dominant route winner. Hasn't had a ton of opportunities, but for the guy who certainly we felt like had the super elite tight end upside, from play to play to play, watching him run what he going against, D-backs, linebackers, one-on-one, I don't see a guy that's really striking fear in any defenses so far.
Yeah, that's intriguing because I think towards the tail end of last year, we saw glimpses and flashes of that guy. The touchdown in the playoffs against the Steelers comes to mind where, hey, just beat the backer down the seam for a cover 2 shot and you'll win. Once again, game script hasn't really allowed him to do that to this point. But that's the type of guy that the Bills not hope for, they need going forward. Because once again, I don't view this team in September and October. I'm thinking how our defense is going to play this team when it matters. And when it matters, you need a dude who I think Kincaid will develop into to be that guy. And they've been played differently because of game script. I mean, they only had like 3 possessions in first half against the Cardinals. They ran the ball. I think Josh Allen had 3 attempts or something odd like that. I'm not like cautioning any alarms, but I do want to see what happened towards the tail end of last year, this year.
Yeah, no alarms for me, but I think you made the point. What we saw last 3 games of last year, I haven't seen yet through 2 games this year. And then with Keon Coleman, to me, so far he looks like a guy who's a little unsure running his routes, and there's a few times where he's not running a route, he's trying to juke a defensive back. And I'm not concerned at all about that because he's a rookie. This is game 2. I think this is what we should have expected for Keon Coleman, even though this is a league where, Marvin Harrison can have 2 touchdowns and $130 and a quarter in his second game of the year. It's a different level of player at the top of round 2, and I think we all should have expected that. The other reason why I'm not concerned about Coleman, even though the route running hasn't been great, is that week 1 against Arizona, he made that one play where a defensive back is on his hip and he still makes a catch, gets both feet in on the sideline. So I think what I'm saying to Bills fans is Keon Coleman's probably going to be this guy for a while, maybe all year, but I haven't seen enough out of this to where I'm concerned, nervous, alarm button, nothing, because I think Keon Coleman's right where he should have been expected to be through 2 games.
Yeah, when you speak on a receiver looking unsure of themselves, running routes, and you're like, man, like they're looking like they don't know what's going on out there. I do want to caution everyone out there, and this is something I didn't learn until I was in college because in high school it was the same way. Like the routes that you see on Madden, where you just see, hey, like a guy just goes here to here, and like that's all he has to do. It's not how it works in the NFL. These guys post snap when safeties moves and corners moves, the route changes. So like a younger guy who's not doesn't have as many reps in that, it's going to take him a little bit to get used to the fact that this route was supposed to be a 10-yard stop, and then all of a sudden that corner's not there anymore. I got to convert it to something else. So sometimes as a receiver, it takes reps to get used to that. I know a great example of that, Rome Odunze, who did go top 10. The final play of the game, it was 4th and 17, and Caleb Williams throws a comeback route, and it looks like Caleb Williams threw the wrong route. But after the game, Rome Odunze said, I should have converted the route because there was a safety over top. That's on me. Stuff like that is going to happen with rookie receivers all of the time because they haven't seen it. And that's okay. It's expected. You just hope that while he's going through the growing pains of a guy who may not know everything that's going on, he'll flash like he did in week 1, where you're like, that's why we drafted that guy with our first pick.
And that's, again, same as almost Von Miller. That's all the Bills need out of him. You can get 5, 6, 10 of those plays of the year, makes a big difference. I mean, that Arizona game, he got him down to the goal line with the touchdown that eventually put it away. I mean, that's what you want out of him so far. So look, 2 good games for the Bills to start. I think the arrow is definitely pointing up. Before we go, I started out this year looking at the Bills as 10-11 win team. Maybe, could miss the playoffs. Like I had them more likely to miss the playoffs than make the Super Bowl. Right now, that's 100% flip. Now, I don't know if the Bills are a Super Bowl team, but the thing that I will say is the first 2 weeks to me have lifted the floor. I don't think the bottom falls out on this team, primarily because what they've done on defense, the injuries have been there to where the bottom could have fallen out, and it hasn't. So to me, through 2 games, that's where my expectations have changed. I don't know if they're a Super Bowl team because I think there's a lot of good, not great outside of Josh Allen, but I would be stunned if this is not at least a 10-win team. And yeah, they might miss the playoffs based on tiebreakers or something like that. But I think the worst case scenario is 10-7, very, very dangerous. Through 2 weeks, has anything changed for you in terms of what you thought of this team, 14 days ago to now?
No, but it's not because of what they've done. I think it's based off what I've seen from other teams. Coming into this, I've always felt that as long as 17 is your quarterback and Sean McDermott is your head coach, the floor is a wild card team, just based off the fact that elite quarterbacks just don't really miss the playoffs. Like they figured it out.
Justin Herbert.
I don't put him in that class. I don't put him in the elite. Like I don't put like I think Josh Allen and Herbert, there's a gap between the two. Like
I agree with that, but like so if we're talking elite quarterbacks, I think your list would be like Burrow, Lamar, Mahomes, Josh, and that's it in terms of guys who can't miss the playoffs.
Yeah, like I think those as long as there's no catastrophic injury and like the roster isn't like what the Rams are going through right now, I think you'll be fine. Like because what the Rams are going through is like 30 times worse than what the Bills are. So as long I've always had faith in that. Having said that, though, I do think that the rest of the AFC, I kind of always had questions about outside of KC because I think that's a phenomenal team. I always thought that the Ravens may take a step back because they lost all of their brain power on defense, especially with their defensive coordinator.
And half their offensive line, too.
Correct. And then the Bengals, their offense will figure it out. You got Joe Burrow and T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. I'm just concerned defensively that outside of Trey Hendrickson, who else is their guy? So coming into the year, I always thought that they were a playoff team that is a step below the Chiefs, and that hasn't swayed me one way or another so far.
That's kind of where we left last year, where the Chiefs were the team, you know, and now I think we went into the postseason last year thinking Baltimore was the team and everybody else was another level, and this year it's the Chiefs. And I think looking around the AFC, you know, Houston has taken the step forward. We kind of expected them to. Beyond that, though, there really isn't anybody else. I mean, Jets are 1-1. The whole AFC North, Pittsburgh is leading the North at 2-0, and no one buys them because they don't have a quarterback. So yeah, the opportunity is there for the Bills to still be, you know, one of the top contenders, if only because there isn't much around them that you're worried about outside of KC.
Caution this, everyone. It is week 2. I remember last year, I don't know if it was week 2 or 3, I think the Dolphins dropped 70 on the Broncos, and they looked like the greatest show on turf. Things change real quick in this league. You've heard it 10,000 times. It's a week-to-week league.
All right, week 2 for us too. Actually, week 1 for us. There will be week 2, and every other week after that, we'll be here every single Wednesday. Usually, is when we'll get it posted. Carl and I will talk about the different Bills games, X's and O's, and obviously different trends going on around the NFL. You can find this RochesterFirst.com, WIVB.com. In Rochester, click on 8 Sports Extra, and you can also find us wherever you get your podcasts. For Carl Jones, I'm Thad Brown. We'll talk to you next week. Jags and Bills Monday night. Let's talk ball. See you then.